fire marshal's office to speak. Al Moore is vacationing, couldn't be with us, but he asks us a long request for volunteers for the SFA, NFPA convention in May. We need people to man the booth. So there's a sign-up sheet outside on the table. Please feel free. At this time, we'd like to do the traditional stand and introduce yourself. So,
I'm Ken Strand with Blue Trail Fire Consultant Design.
Katie Fiordi, State Fire Marshal's Office.
Bob Down, State Fire Marshal Division.
Marilyn Bremer, Nardini Fire.
Tom Brace, State Fire Marshal.
John Hoppy, Harris Fire Protection.
Bill Hoppy, Harris Fire Protection.
Dave Bowenmeyer, Harris Fire Protection.
Ray Arnson, Reagan Research.
Tony Martino, twice retired and still working part-time.
Jim Kemple, Midwest Fire Protection.
Scott Landy, J&J Johnson, Sales and Service. Bill Davis, GE Global Asset Fire Protection.
Kathy Rutherford with him.
Don Merrill, 3M.
Phil Walker, Blue Trail Fire Consultant Design.
Tom Mantel, Shot Cougar.
Steve Clark with Response Fire Protection. Jim Scheller, Lumet Companies.
Tom Miller, Simplex Grinnell.
Mike Lynch, Viking Sprinkler.
Kevin Opitz, Simplex Grinnell.
Dave Kramer, Crane Engineering.
Rich Hool, Open Housing Solutions North America.
Al Larson, Worthwell.
Doug Rivers from 3M. Meyer, North Fire Design. David Holey, Humac Companies. Dave Hewlett, Response Fire Protection.
I'm Warren Anderson with Summit Fire Protection. Ken, can you give us a treasury report?
Short and brief, we have $4,010 in our account.
Was that before or after your trip, Sam?
What's that?
Was that before or after your trip?
That's pretty well.
Bear with us. I'd like Phil Walker to give us a little report from the Governor's Liaison Council.
A little bit of this might be a little bit repetitive on what Tom Brace may say later on, so I'll try and keep those comments real brief and let Tom expound on it a little bit later. I have two reports here. One is on the Governor's Council on Fire Protection, Fire Prevention and Control, and then the other report that I have here is the Task Force on Fire Protection. I guess I'll start out with the task force report. I passed out a report to, I guess, the progress reports to everybody. If they did not receive one, let me know and I'll make sure that they do get one sitting at the table next to Tom. Basically, this report focused on performance-based codes, and I guess some of the questions as far as what are some of the standards that performance-based design should be, what are some of the benchmarks, who's qualified to do performance-based design, who's qualified as, I guess, engineering firms, who's qualified to review them, even when it comes to authorities having jurisdiction, because we feel it is going to become an important issue in the 21st century. And most of the meeting was concentrated on that as far as requirements for licensing, documenting, enforcement, and education, and the intent of performance-based codes. Moving on to the Governor's Council meeting, which was just this morning, that I attended with a couple of gentlemen in this room, going over some of the high points here. A couple of topics that were talked about was low-income housing and how low-income housing in general can become affordable. And many communities building fire code divisions have practices to where they review on a case-by-case basis high-density housing and some of the allowable rules and practices for the high-density housing. And one of them is the inclusion of automatic fire sprinkler systems in these housing units. It's to help alleviate some of the concerns and some of the fire egress and building access features of this. A couple of the other items, President Wolfberger and Vice President Tom Kressler were renominated and re-elected to new 2-year terms. A couple other items regarding performance-based codes. There were concerns on qualified individual firms, et cetera, regarding performance-based design and whether it's going to be a fully sprinklered structure or not, and what constitutes the definition of fully sprinklered, whether fully sprinklered means fully sprinklered to NFPA 13 system or fully sprinklered to NFPA 13D to 13R. I know that we receive some phone calls in our office sometimes as far as requirements on whether a building or structure such as a 3 or 4 story apartment or condominium complex, whether it should be that type of system. And one of the things is mentions that refer back to the architect and whether they took the sprinkler exception to that building. And if they did, that may mean fully sprinkler, not necessarily a 1300 system. Some of the other highlights, and I think that Tom will talk about, is regarding our $1.92 billion shortfall that we have right now, regarding our governor's proposed combination tax increase and infrastructure cuts deal with the shortfall. And it's going to affect all departments, and it's probably going to affect Mr. Brace's department too, unless some things are done about this. There's going to be a major push on a couple of legislative issues, such as the high-rise retrofit bill. And I don't know if anybody's seen any commercials that NFSA has put out lately regarding fire sprinklers. You notice that there have been commercials on channel 4, 11, and 9, John? Okay. If anybody hasn't seen those commercials, look for them. If they want to know approximately when they're going to be on, they can obtain, I guess, through...
We have copies of it.
Yeah, you've got it. Okay. That they can talk to John about getting a copy and check out those commercials. And they do address 2 things that we notice in particular, that says anywhere from single-family homes to high-rises. And those are 2 important issues I think we're going to be addressing here in 2002. Another issue talked about was daycare inspections. That probably should be mandatory and done more often, but again, where the funding's going to come from that, who knows? This is going to be a big election year that everyone should contact their local legislator this year regarding fire services and about not cutting funding to any fire or other fire-related services. I don't think it's in fire industry's best interest. I don't think it's in the general public's best interest. If you do have some concerns, then please contact your legislators. There was also concerns about other types of systems, sprinkler systems in general, residential sprinkler systems in general, which I think Tom may touch base about too, as far as the types available, who's qualified to design and install them, because we all would like to see more sprinkler legislation, more safety in our homes and residential sprinklers is one of those safety features that's talked about. Also spoke about July 1st, 2002, the target date for the National Fire Code and International Building Code joint adoption by the state with amendments. It's anticipated now, but as far as amendments and accepted or proposed, should be on the state's website according to the information that we've received. Again, Tom will probably talk a little bit more about this later. Let's see. There was a special WCCO TV regarding residential sprinklers, and anybody who hasn't seen it, it is very good. It's very informational. And again, through NFSA here, Region 15, if anybody's interested in trying to obtain a copy of either the video or the CD, they can talk to John Hobby about that with NFSA. Again, Warren had mentioned about the annual convention in Minneapolis this year for NFPA and also for SFPD. Again, we're looking for corporate sponsors for our booths and also for door prizes and for the raffle. And they could see either myself or Al or any of the other officers for information on that. One thing that was brought up was, again, each year SFPE, which the Minnesota Fire Protection Council is actually the Minnesota chapter of the Society of Fire Protection Engineers, SFPE. And generally every year they have an awards banquet, and it's usually an East Coast dominated presentation. And talking with the Director Kathleen Oman, she agreed with me that it'd be a nice touch to work. We had some Midwest flavor this year to it, so we're soliciting nominations for SFPE awards from our local chapter. One of the qualifications that you have to be a member of the national SFPE, which some of our members are. If you aren't, I would encourage you to become a member. I'm going to, on Kathleen's suggestion, talk to the membership. I guess some of the other chapters are doing, which I learned today, is for first-time membership with a local chapter that's picked up a portion of their costs to become initial members, and then have them pick it up from there. But at least it's kind of an incentive to get them to join initially. So that's something that will probably be discussed the next time that we get together to encourage membership. But it would be nice to have, I guess, some of our own nominated and maybe one of our own win one of these awards, because they are fairly prestigious. So if you know of someone, including yourself, or someone close to you who you feel could be or should be qualified for one of these nominations, please see me and we'll make sure that we get the ball rolling and paperwork going on it. And one last thing that I have is that Paul Allen, the owner of Microsoft, is I guess on his website, they are sponsoring a musical CD by a group called Grown Men, which I learned today that Paul Allen was actually a member of this band. And they have a CD out, the initial CD. You may want to go to Paul Allen's website. I guess it may concern some of you, but the cover to the CD shows a toddler on their knees leaning over a guitar and I guess a toy doll or whatever, with a match in one hand and a can of lighter fluid in the other. And I guess it doesn't paint a real good picture of fire, and I guess with me it struck a little bit of a nerve because the community where I live in Maple Grove, I am a juvenile intervention commissioner for children fire setters, and I interviewed children fire setters, and children fire setters, many of them are curiosity fire setters, and anything that kind of paints this in a real bad light, I guess. I'm not saying it offends me, but it does concern me. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not a big politically correct person, as some of you know. I'm not a big tree hugger or anything like that, but if you want to go to the website and take a look at the picture and draw your own conclusions, and it doesn't bother you at all, you don't have to do anything about it, but if it does concern you a little bit, feel free to, I guess, contact Paul Allen on his website. And
What's the URL?
Pardon me?
What's the URL for?
That's one thing I failed to write down. I don't have it with me. But if you just put in Paul Allen and go search, you should find it right away. You can also get it through Marilyn Island is the one who forwarded the information to me at Maple Grove Fire. That she would have that information also. So I guess with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Warren.
Thanks, Bill. Well, to say that our speaker tonight needs no introduction is pretty much of an understatement. Mr. John Brace has been the state fire marshal since 1987 and the director of the Office of Pipeline Safety since 1994. I have a list of his accomplishments, but almost all of it include president or chair or co-founder. Way too many to mention. Also, Tom's going to be our keynote speaker at the SFPE chapter breakfast in Maine. So, with that, please welcome Mr. Tom Brace.
Thank you very much, Warren. It's a pleasure to once again be before this group. I'd like to start out a little bit with a story about a guy early one morning, gets up, he's in his kitchen, he's looking out the back window, and he notices a German Shepherd just prancing around early in the morning, and has in its mouth a rabbit. Now, that's not so unusual, except the neighbor right next door raises rabbits. And so he yells for his wife and rushes out to try to retrieve the rabbit from the jaws of this playful German Shepherd. He gets the rabbit away, and of course the rabbit has expired. Gone to the next plateau, whatever your persuasion is. But he and his wife decide if they can clean up the rabbit, i.e. they take to the kitchen sink and wash it off and shampoo the rabbit and blow dry the hair, and they were going to sneak over to the fence and just open the cage and slip the rabbit back in the cage. And carefully shut the cage door, and then when the owner comes out, the rabbit is, just expired. Well, a couple days later, he's out in his yard, and the next door neighbor, the lady, says, a funny thing happened. And of course, Fluffy died. Yes, we buried Fluffy. And 3 days later, he appeared back in his cage. Now, I start off with that because things are not always what they seem. And I think that's a nice segue into the state budget. 1.92 billion shortfall. July of the same year, almost $900 million returned to the hardworking taxpayers of the state of Minnesota. 6 months later, catastrophe. I had this executive briefing from the Department of Finance, one of their key people, and it was a doom and gloom speech about the state of the state economy. And listened very carefully, and I asked this question, is it more difficult to project a surplus than it is to project a deficit? And the man thought a moment and he said no. And I said, well, why is it then that we're using the same company who failed consistently to estimate the size of the surplus, but yet the size of the deficit we're taking as gospel? And that is the reality of where we are in state government right now. That estimate by the same company who has not hit it correct for about 4 years is taken as we need to cut to 1.92 billion. And then there were, of course, a number of areas in government that will not be cut. And there's a great lack of knowledge about the budget of the state of Minnesota. Let me just give you a couple of simple facts. To run state government, i.e. state employees, let me once again recognize Bureau Chief Dom and Plan Reviewer Extraordinaire, Katie. But state employees take 8% of the state budget. 8%. K through 12 and higher education, 51%. So half of the state dollar goes to education. So the governor came out with his cuts, and I thought it was really, and I mean no criticism, it was an interesting mixture of cuts and some tax increases, and a lot of pass-through money. And what I'm saying is money that would go, say the local government didn't make the last step. It might be passed through a state agency, and the state agency in some cases offered some of that money up. An example would be the $1.2 million for a match for a disaster, a natural disaster. That got offered into the pot. So the governor, to his credit, brought his plan out early. It's being discussed now. It's going to be, there was a meeting yesterday, a briefing on that. And the target that the State Fire Marshal Division had to meet was about $168,000, which we met by, as Phil accurately in his report indicated, I have a draft of a letter on my desk that the State Fire Marshal Division will be out of the daycare business. We will not be inspecting daycare. And we make that decision with great regret. But the bottom line is the only thing I do that I'm not absolutely statutorily mandated to do. I'm in somebody else's rules. I have to be in DHS rules. Everything else we do in the Marshal's office is a clear statutory link. So I have regretfully will inform DHS that we cannot continue, given the present configuration. But those of you that are even a casual reader of the two papers, sometimes affectionately referred to as the enemy paper, or listen to the print media, or the other media, visual or sound, will know that the Democrats would like to spend more money on certain things, particularly education. The Democrats in the Senate, the Republicans in the House would like to make sure that there's no tax increases at all, so that would mean more cuts, state and or local government. And we got the governor right in the middle. And one political pundit whose wisdom I respect indicated that he thought that the governor would get to somewhere between 65% of what he's asking for, because it's right between the two parties. And as you know, the House isn't particularly fond of the Senate isn't particularly fond of the House, and neither one are particularly fond of the governor. And we all know what the governor thinks of the legislature. So, whatever your political persuasion is, God love you. Just go out and vote is the only thing that I can say. But clearly, I honestly believe that this will be the meanest, toughest session on record in Minnesota. And that wonderful quality of Minnesota nice, which I do believe, as someone who is a transplant to the state. You're not going to see much of that in evidence between now and the end of this session. So I believe, bluntly, we are all losers in that, but until we see the end of the session, I'm not sure just what the outcome will be. Maybe these cuts don't stick to the Fire Marshal Division, maybe they're even greater. As I say, we'll have to see how it all plays out. On top of that is things like Fingerhut. If we were a group tonight whose livelihood and business was basically St. Cloud, I think this would be a very sober evening. Clearly, they're going to need some help. The city of St. Cloud, in terms of just unemployment compensation and so forth. Kmart, if you read the paper, has gone into Chapter 11, which will buy them some time. Life without the blue light special is a sobering one to contemplate. But someone else argued that it's important to have Kmart, Target, and Walmart all up and healthy in the sense that competition is good and it drives prices down. I mean, that's the theory. of the free marketplace. And while I mentioned the free market, I would be remiss not to mention Enron. In my other life, I am the director of the Office of Pipeline Safety, as we mentioned in the introduction. That's been fascinating. That's a program, if I could take one quick aside, that is the people who drafted it, created it, it's a little better than 10 years old now, really put together a strong budgetary framework for it, and it's doing very, very well. It's a real management challenge for those of you that are administrators, is that a part of my office is doing very well fiscally, and the other part is really scraping for dollars. But Enron, we have been required to produce some documentation on their business practices in Minnesota. They own companies in Minnesota that we regulate. Although their Minnesota operation, as far as I'm concerned, is extremely clean and it's well done, and at least from our inspections and reviews of it. So we'll see how that one all plays out. I'm always amazed a little bit that I've been a public employee for 25 years. I've been told throughout my life that by people that I pay your salary, and I always try to say, and you get a good value for your dollar. But clearly, if you look at our staff, both fire marshal and pipeline safety, I work with some of the finest dedicated people that I've ever had the pleasure to work with, and that they are not compensated for what they're worth. Clearly, far, far below it. But we're always asked to look at the private sector as a model. And I would just submit to you that in terms of commitment and dedication to fire and life safety, I'm very, very proud of the people we have. Some of you, by your introductions, are in the sprinkler business. Lots of things happening in the sprinkler business. Let me just give you just a brief few numbers for those of you that like numbers. Last year we looked at 457 plans. That was up from 30, more than 2,000. We're currently about 4 weeks behind, I'm told. I think the best was 2 weeks at one time, but 4 weeks it seems to be about the average. What I thought was interesting, just these couple numbers, 224 plans, this is out of the 457 total, were reviewed just once, or 56% of the plans that came into our office, and they get a thorough review, 56% passed the first time. Another 136 were reviewed twice. That would be 34%. You put them together, and even for a non-engineer, that's 90%, make it through on the first or second submittal. I think that's pretty good. 90% on the first or second time. Obviously, it's one of those things you keep working on to get better, but I want to compliment the industry. I think that's good. Now, I was looking down to page 1, for Sol. And his plans reviewed, or her plans, I don't know, we don't have names here, 5 times. That person might consider another line of work. And if you're in this room, there was an attempt at humor, so. I honestly don't know who you are. But, you know, if 90% over 2 submittals can do it, and I have a great respect for a set of sprinkler plans that are not done on the back of a napkin in a restaurant. I think there are some, obviously some care, skill, and engineering that goes into it. So that program is alive. We have tried for 2 years in a row to get a dedicated account. That bill is still alive. I think we should continue to try to get a dedicated account for the sprinkler plan review fees and the inspection fees. I urge you from the private sector to continue your efforts. Clearly my efforts from the state side are being blocked. I had the opportunity to run into the Department of Finance budget officer, and I walked up to him and with his entourage, And I said, you know, you are the man that is on the very top of my Christmas card list. And it was like Moses parting the waters. All the entourage just kind of evaporated around me. So I've tried 3 major ideas developed by myself and our key staff, and the Department of Finance has not bought one of them. And I'm beginning to say that you cannot be entirely wrong 3 times, using some of the basic guidelines that this governor has set down. So it is disappointing, and it's more disappointing to my staff, I feel, that who are working hard and deserve to be supported. We are currently down 11 people, and I find that, but our workload has gone up. I'm glad to be part of the team, and I'll take my fair share of cuts during difficult times, but we are not growing in terms of prosperity. And you begin to wonder is, how do we level this playing field? And I frankly think it's the private sector speaking up that interfaces with the Office of the State Fire Marshal that helps level its playing field. I do not think, though, that this particular session is the one to level it. Frankly, if we get through it without open conflict, I think it will be considered a success. When a Lutheran minister, who is also a senator, addressed down, once again, the Department of Finance in the strongest language I've ever heard him use, and I've known him and regard him as a friend as well as a colleague. I think that's just the beginning of this session. Other things that are going to be discussed and debated, the high-rise retrofit. We just might get that this year. There's some growing safety, and tall buildings have a resonant tone. I want you to know that I intend to fight with every bit of my energy for the high-rise retrofit bill. As you recall, we passed it twice in the previous administration, only to have it vetoed by the former governor. I think it's fun to mention those things so we keep this all in perspective. We're in the long view. Anybody that installs sprinkler systems is clearly in the long view. That system may be in existence, hopefully maintained, for 20 or 30 years before it's ever called upon to act. So, as I say, we're in the long view. For those of you that like fireworks, major effort to open Minnesota up to fireworks. Hasn't been open since '41. We have multiple generations that don't know how to use fireworks. The first team is in town. The governor likes fireworks. The Commissioner of Public Safety likes fireworks. And is so testified. The Minnesota Fire Service, particularly the chiefs and the volunteers, don't like fireworks. They really don't like fireworks. So, if you talk about a battle shaping up, there's one. Fire-resistant cigarettes. Last time that was heard, there were 14 lobbyists by the cigarette companies in the audience. We're counting the votes on that one. This is a new technology. It exists today. Merit cigarettes. Merit. Is it absolutely foolproof? No. But as you put one down in an ashtray, it does not continue to burn. It goes out. Little rings, if you will, in the paper. We're waiting for a national effort. We've been waiting for 20 years for a national bill on fire-resistant cigarettes. The industry said it can't be done, but by gosh, it is, and it's available and they're selling it. As you know, I am a pipe smoker. Some of you know that. If you examine my clothes closely, you will see the holes that are irrefutable proof of careless pipe smoking, which is a bane of my good, long-suffering wife. But be that as it may, as you may notice, a pipe smoker is continually relighting a pipe. And a normal cigarette, if you will, would be such a thing, has an additive in it that causes a cigarette to keep burning. Historically, when cigarettes first came out, they didn't have this additive, and people would pick them up out of an ashtray or where they set them and relight it. And the industry realized, no, it's got to keep on burning, so they, go for a new one. Marketing at its extreme. Terrorism, big topic this year. Lots of ideas, lots of money. And one bill I was looking at has about a $24 million price tag to it. Raises about $5 million, so maybe the true price tag is about $29 million. I think we'll see some things on terrorism, as well as we should. I've been to a number of hearings, particularly through my work on the pipeline side of the House. But watch for some innovative ideas, particularly in the telephone surcharge arena for 911. Not the event on September 11th, but 911 telephone surcharge. Watch for that going up. There's a number of people have their eye on how do we raise that up. So, and then of course more training for the fire service, particularly as it pertains to terroristic acts. And I would be remiss if I didn't say something about September 11th. I will go and honor, I do this every year, fallen firefighters. In April, this year we had 4 times as many die as previous years. 343 firefighters lost their life at Ground Zero, New York City. A horrendous tragedy that will resonate through the fire service for generations. The old cliche about the folks that run toward the burning building while everyone is running the other way, took on new and obviously tragic meaning. I think it is interesting to note that people from the entire fire department, including the chief, were lost. Management died, the basic grunt died, and everybody in between. And there, to me, is a day of retribution for the perpetrators of that cowardly act, to be sure. One cartoon that I particularly liked, we're talking a little bit about this in the office, is there's a firefighter that is more or less in the rubble, and a military soldier coming by and saying, "We'll take it from here." And clearly, I think that's what's happening. I apologize for the emotion, but it bothers me that people who are caring and trying to help die. That is in contrast to somebody whose personal behavior is so destructive as to have a blood alcohol level of 0.30, sit in a upholstered furniture and smoke and fall asleep. I mean, there's probably not a lot you can do with someone who has that destructive behavior and perishes as a result of their action. But the former will have a profound impact. I've been in the fire service since 1975, and I can remember reading about Watts. The Watts riots, you can remember with the death of Martin Luther King. Another tragedy, to be sure, and we just honored him on Monday. But firefighters in Watts were shot at, and fire hoses were chopped in half, sometimes with an axe grabbed off the truck. And it took years for the fire service in Los Angeles, and actually around the country, but particularly in Los Angeles, to come to grips with, we're there trying to help, why were they shooting at us? It's a mindset that they couldn't identify, is what I'm saying. And this one is going to take some years to come to grips with. One wag said, and I would quote, "You know, we didn't lose a single building official." I think you want to be a little careful how far you take that analogy, but it does go say something to when they talk about a building and the lifetime of a building, that the fire service is going to be clearly impacted through time by that building versus the building official who signs a piece of paper and sends it on its way. We were mentioning just a little bit about fire deaths. We had the second lowest year since we kept records in the fire marshal's office. Last year we lost 42 people. That's a tragedy, but the previous year was 51. So all I can say is I like the direction it's moving, down. Now that's the good news. The bad news is to date we've lost 4, and what is today, the 23rd? So not a real good start if you start bringing it out, from a percentage basis throughout the year. I mentioned here just briefly the destructive behavior, and I wanted to talk a little bit about fire safety along with your previous reporter, Phil's comments about juvenile fire setters and area. I just want to read you just a couple statistics. This is the blood alcohol level of a number of people that we personally bagged and tagged. 0.25, 0.281, 0.441, 0.129, 0.18, 0.35, 0.325, 0.212, 0.19. Now some of those numbers, that person would never hear a smoke detector. They would probably not hear taps blown in their ear by a trumpet player 6 inches away. I do think we have seen the demise and the direction of fire fatalities is going down. And clearly the smoke detector was key to 20 years ago. The battery cost $10 and the smoke detector was $100. Today you can buy an excellent smoke detector for between $5 and $10. You can even buy long life 10-year batteries. But I would submit to you tonight that those of us that are interested in public fire safety education and bringing that trend line down, we're going to have to focus on those hard to educate groups. And then we're also going to have to say that for my alcoholic friends, that there may not be a lot we can do. The problem is that so many times, if that person, God forbid, is a caregiver, they take a child or someone else with them. I'll never forget a press conference. I was talking about arson, and a particularly bad arson fire, and we just got the talks back on a woman and 2 children that died, and the woman, the mother, the caregiver, 0.235, and the reporter asked, well, do you think that impaired the ability of the mother to get the children out? Well, 0.10, we say don't operate a piece of machinery, i.e. an automobile. This was twice as much. And I answered by saying, okay, the fire was 2:38 in the morning. It was pitch black inside. The smoke detector was there but had no battery. You wake up to, if in fact you do wake up, and many people don't, to disorientation and accurate smoke, and then with that, carrying that load, you're lucky if you can find your hand and then find your face with the same hand. So yes, absolutely. I think that we'll reach a point, and I'll make the prediction down the road, is that we're going to begin to charge some of these people. And I think there's a point that says, you need to take some responsibility for your negligence. Someone say, oh gosh, they've suffered enough. Well, I think it's a special thing to be a parent. And I dare say that there are a number of parents out here in this room, and with the idea of being a parent or a caregiver, goes some additional responsibility. And staying reasonably sober may not be an unreasonable act. Think about, if you will, the fact that in our statistics, there are two groups historically that are at the greatest risk from fire deaths. Our children 10 and under, and our seniors 60 and over. So if you're a caregiver in between that range, you've got an additional responsibility, as far as I'm concerned. Now, a couple of more things, and then I'll bring it to a close and entertain any questions. I can't offer you equal time. Maybe I'll offer you a question. I-codes, over 25 years, the Uniform Fire Code has been the law of the land in Minnesota. 25 years. Actually, 26 now. 1979. We're making a major pivot, and that pivot's got sprinklers written all over it. And I'm pro-sprinkler, and I'm a little anxious. That is a highly, the I-code, building and fire code, heavily sprinkler driven. No question about it. That goes to these folks here, even makes their job even more important, and some additional resources. Around July 1, I think we will be ready to go. We're yoked together with the Building Code Division. We've got to come across the finish line absolutely together. So they stub their toe, we're going to have to wait for them. If we stub our toe, they're going to have to wait for us. We will adopt the 2000 edition of the International Building Code, International Fire Code at the same time. Same time, same place, same date, same rule hearing, and so forth. A major piece of work, and there's a few people that have thrown a few rocks at them. That doesn't mean that other codes are not equally good, but I am committed to a close and working relationship with the building officials as I can. And they clearly wanted the I-code, International Building Code, and that certainly influenced my decision mightily. So we'll have some training exercises. I just want to say it's a major pivot for Minnesota. And I have made a personal and public commitment is that we will not go backwards. So in the code adoption process, if the International Fire Code is less than what we currently have, then we're going to have to amend it to at least level that field. But it is clearly a sprinkler driven. Another issue that I'd like to close on, and we'll be able to explore it more in May, and I'm just delighted that NFPA is coming here. I've worked for years, and we never had in Minnesota a facility big enough to handle NFPA. They're spring meetings. So they are coming. It will be an affair that, for those of you that have never been to an NFPA meeting, and they have one-day passes and so forth, make sure you avail yourself of it. It's a real experience. We'll explore performance-based codes, and I'm anxious to get into that from a policy standpoint. And I've been collecting material already to obviously not embarrass Minnesota by standing up and discussing this issue. But I wanted to close with the idea of the intent of the code versus it's in the book. And this was brought home to me today in a discussion that I was having about a facility. It happened to be a sprinkler facility on a college campus. And that's as far as I need to go for specificity. But, how does it fit? Does it fit? What are we trying to protect? What is the uses of the building and so forth? I feel that the citizenry of this nation is becoming more and more educated in the whole arena of fire protection. And if they're not, they're educated enough to go to the phone book and look up people who are and subsequently hire them. And the challenge, I believe, is that when we look at alternative methods and materials, are they truly equivalent? And are they what they are as advertised? And I believe that trying to label things as, well, you don't think out of the box, or you're too rigid, or you're unwilling to change, or all these little bromides that get thrown out at someone. Let's make sure that what was the intent of the code, what were they trying to accomplish by this requirement? Can we articulate it to somebody who may not be extremely knowledgeable about fire safety, and then so that they understand what is being placed upon them as a requirement, as a legal requirement? I think it's absolutely critical. And if we can't do that and articulate it well, then we either find somebody else who can, or change the law, or amend the law. And I can see several issues on the near horizon in that whole arena. But let's not stampede into, this is the way we always did it. That doesn't have any more validity than you've got to always think outside the box. I mean, let's look at history and let's evaluate history. We have a wonderful track record in the past with sprinklers, as an example. Let's not compromise that record. On the other hand, let's try to understand what is being proposed. And this is what, in my mind, an understanding of history, but also an ability to look toward the future tells you. And that's the challenge, and that's the fire protection challenge. It's a challenge in a number of other arenas, but clearly tonight our topic is fire and life safety. So together, and I think groups like this help immeasurably discuss some of these cutting edge issues. Governor's Council on Fire Prevention and Control, and Phil was a little modest here, uncharacteristically so. He was elected to the executive committee of the Governor's Council on Fire Prevention and Control this morning, without a dissenting vote or without another candidate. So we're delighted to see Phil join that group. That has existed since 1978. And has written and stood for a number of very interesting programs on fire safety. So publicly, congratulations to you, Bill, for that accomplishment. So, reasonable men and women gathered around a table, discussing the issues, debating, agreeing to disagree, and hopefully out of that comes a product that does protect, or a process that does protect life and property from fire. And together we can, we will, and most importantly, we must make a difference. Thanks for your support and your attention. Any questions or comments anybody has? Or, as I say, Warren urged me not to give anybody equal time. We'll never get out tonight. But, is there something I might add? Yes, Phil, please.
Well, since you embarrassed me, I take a The central voluntary recall that's going on right now is, how is that coming along? And I guess from what I've heard, it's the central personnel are doing the actual sprinkler replacement, or are they actually being done by licensed contractors here in Minnesota?
Both Bob and Katie have been working that issue more than I have. I got something to say to Bob or Katie, either one of you quickly.
We're doing a couple of things with Central Tyco. You folks are probably aware we've got a method of collecting data on the sprinklers in Minnesota that's up on our website. And people, we'd like to see a little bit more activity on that, but we encourage people to, when you discover those hits, to report those to us, excuse me, by filling out that form on the web. We provide that data to Central on a quarterly basis, and they in turn provide to us what they're getting for claims filed. I believe and I'm a little hesitant, I don't want to give you numbers, but the last report I got from them, I believe, identified 15 contractors in Minnesota that Central had established as, I'll use the word qualified, I don't know what word they're using. I just don't recall it, but they've acknowledged this to do the installations. The number of reports that have received to us, and we then compare them to see where claims have been filed. And I just finished entering the last batch of reports, and I think there was like 8 or 10 where we had compatibility between reports that we had and claims that have been filed with Central. They're receiving more claims than we're receiving, so we're going to try to balance those things out. That give you what you're looking for, or is there something more specific, Bill, or Katie, anything you can add there?
Well, so has the replacement begun yet?
Yes.
In the state, okay.
Yes, they have, right, they have, and again, forgive me, Phil, I don't recall the numbers right offhand, but it is on their report that they send to us quarterly. I just don't recall how many jobs have been done. I'm sorry, but if you want to know, give me a call, and I'll be glad to pull that out and tell you what's on their report. With the caveat that now I believe the date of that report was the end of November, so.
It is clearly one of the darkest days for any of us that are pro-sprinkler people. The thing that bothered me the most about the whole issue was being in a room with the top management, and they couldn't tell you what was wrong, why they were having a failure. And that was from the president on down. It kind of reminded me of that old homily about a cat with a long tail in a room full of rocking chairs. And they were very uncomfortable. And that was initially, and of course, we're bad to worse. I have been told by people whose judgment I trust is that Minnesota was not a extremely fertile ground for that particular product. I mean, yes, it was installed, but not anywhere in the numbers that say a Virginia or a Maryland was installed. Tony?
On that same token, has there been any analysis or attempted analysis to find out what went wrong with the testing program that allowed that product to get onto the market?
Well, at the risk of saying something politically incorrect, which I'd never be accused of, I would say that the restructuring of UL with new leadership could be traceable back to that, in part.
A result of or before?
As a result of the central, what do you want to say, diplomatically, problem or failure or whatever words you choose to use. I think that you have some public sector salesmen, i.e. fire service people that rock them right back on their heels, that had gone way out on limbs recommending that these be installed in some cases voluntarily, and then to have that failure rate, felt that they were left holding the bag, and then having to go back in and say, we need to change these out. I do think the company, well, I don't know how far I want to go into that, but as I say, I look at it bluntly as a rather black day for the relationship between industry and the public fire service.
Well, I think more of the, supposedly all these things, we do a lot of tests and everything else before they're released, but something had to go, apparently had to go wrong in that test period, otherwise they would have picked it up.
Well, then you would hope so. But as I say, I think part of the restructuring of UL is traceable to maybe a little more vigorous testing, maybe a little more long-term testing. I know the association that I was formerly president of, the National Association of State Fire Marshals, had some rather intense dialogue with UL over that issue and several others. Because I don't know if you realize it or not, but in state statutes, we'll reference UL as such and such shall meet UL standards or any other nationally recognized standard. From a private organization, we made them quasi-governmental. and then all of a sudden, some of these test protocols didn't quite work out that way. Any other questions or comments?
And the only seminars coming up on the International Building Code?
Yes.
State farmers, seminars.
Yes, we're looking at joint ones, and one of the ways is to go on our website for the state building code division. My vision, I know that's another operable word today, is I'd like to see like the building code start out at the first of the week, and then building fire code in the middle of the week, and end with the fire code, or, some other combination. So if somebody wanted to get just the fire piece, they could. Somebody wanted to get just the building piece, they could, or out of the interface, they could. But it would take about a week to do it. I'd also like the building code division to pay for it. There's an example of a dedicated account. When I started, this is not, I'm not particularly proud of, the fire marshal's office had 64 people, building code division had 23. Today they have 53 people. We have 53 people. They have $5 million in reserve for building code surcharge. And they're hiring people left and right, And I'm doing the very best I can not to have to lay off people that, as you know, the seniority system is the last hired, first fired. Some of the last hired folks are wonderful and really dedicated people. And I'm going to do just about anything not to lay somebody off. And you say, well, you lack courage. No, I don't think I lack courage. I've had to do that in the state of Washington with an economic downturn, but there was no question that the state of Washington at that time was in the middle of a deep recession. This one is a little too volatile to predict. Anybody want to guess what the February projection is going to be? Are we going up? Are we going down? Is it going to be about the same? How many in this room bought a new car here in the last 6 months? God, I'm envious. No, but I hear that zero financing, I happen to know a few people in the car business, there's a tremendous rush of people buying automobiles with zero financing, and to the point that the used car market is in trouble because there's a glut of used cars. The state motor pool is in trouble because they rely to somewhat on the auctions. They auction automobiles. Goodbye, I might put a plug in for motor pool. I would until they announced the news today they're raising their rates. But their auction sales are going down because, you can get a really good buy on used cars because it's not holding up. I know that the revenue from licenses is going up way over projection, but this will all peak off somewhere, theoretically. I think the consumer is still spending. I think the issue may be the corporate world, the large corporate world is the problem. Any other questions or comments? Go.
You talked about funding from plan reviews going into
dedicated accounts.
Yes, your efforts.
I've not been successful. The bill's been written, and we've tried twice, but not been able to do it.
So what can we do? Who would we contact?
Well, Bill Straczynski is the lobbyist for the National Fire Sprinkler Association Region 15 group. Is a good one. He carried that bill last year. It's still alive. It still exists. It went all the way into the conference bill, but didn't carry the day. But I think there's a moral issue there. And I'm convinced that when I say that publicly, that gets back to the Department of Finance, and that explains a little bit why the Department of Finance is I'm not on their top of their Christmas card list. But I think when you collect a fee from the industry, it ought to go to what it was collected for. And if you collect too much, you ought to lower your fees. And if you don't collect enough to do the job you're statutorily mandated to, then you ought to raise the fees. But you shouldn't make money off the back of the user of your service, but it ought to be, pretty much balanced. You can never get absolute parity. But it never was designed to augment the general fund. I don't think that's right. I'm convinced that people, particularly in Minnesota, have a high expectation of government, as well as pay a lot for it. But I don't know how much of you travel around this country, but when it snows, and we've had this unusual winter to be sure, but when it snows, our snow gets plowed. Go in a few neighboring states, and take your four-wheel drive because you're going to need it in some cases. I was amazed, this is a Seattle transplant, I was amazed to see that they would put out on the radio only essential travel, and I needed to, I felt I was essential, I needed to be out. And see a line of snowplows going down the highway at 4 or 5 abreast, at 45 degrees, and they're plowing the whole freeway in one pass. And I thought, boy, there's my tax dollar at work. Try to drive, I don't know, if you drive on some secondary roads in Wisconsin in the winter. It's a little different story than it is in Minnesota. And I think we pay a lot for government, but I also think we get a lot more. And I think that people are not necessarily opposed to paying if they get something of value for their money, but they are very opposed to paying for something that they think has little or no worth. Which will all close with this. There was a hypnotist. And he came out on a stage, about 250 people. And he said, a hypnotist, you've seen it one, you've seen them all. So they call a couple people up from the audience, and they do something foolish or silly. And all the audience laughs, and they go back down. They're all embarrassed. He calls a couple other people up and hypnotizes them. So I want to do something really special tonight. He said, I'd like to hypnotize all of you at one time. But you've got to promise me that you'll pay rapt attention, close attention. Do I have your promise? Everybody, this is going to be really something. So he reaches in his pocket, and he pulls out this old pocket watch, beautiful antique pocket watch, and this antique gold chain, and he holds up and says, watch the watch. And starts the watch going, to the left, to the right, pendulum, arc, I know it's a few engineering terms. Back and forth, and the whole audience is going like this and like this. And all of a sudden, there's this antique gold chain, snap. And down goes the chain, and the watch, beautiful antique watch, hits this wood stage, and it's in 1,000 pieces. And he says, under his breath, shit. You got 2 weeks to clean the thing. Takes a little reality check. This is the latest Fire in Minnesota. We have a few copies up here. We'd be glad to share with anybody who wants them. We're proud of this work, but it gives you a picture of what the fire problem and fire issues are in Minnesota. So, thank you again.
Thanks, Tom. We'll be back. Next month's meeting is here, February 27th, on fire pumps and controllers. Hope to see you here. Thank you.